Hey guys, this is Smithy. Welcome to my channel. Today's video is so very special. Today's video is the highest, most hyped video, I would say, that I look forward to. It is ranking all my eyeshadow palettes that I tried in 2024. I've included all the eyeshadow palettes that I've tried. I have thoughts on some of the brands. I have thoughts on some of the palettes. So if you want to see and hear all my thoughts, then please keep on watching. I have 61 palettes to rank today. I'm not gonna say the numbers just because I know I'm gonna mess it up. So let's begin. On the bottom, we have Beauty Moon Cosmetics and Ice Cream Beauty Hope and Bloom palette. And I ranked this on the bottom just because it is a very monochromatic palette and this is not the color story that I gravitate towards. I would say there were a few shades that would like just blend away, but the highlight of the palette is this shade Hope, which is like a holochrome shade. That's a very, very pretty shade, but rest all the shades are like a little meh for me, and that's why this is ranking on number 61. On number 60, we have Jason Wu's palette. This is a 9-pan eyeshadow palette. I did want to try out like drugstore brands for eyeshadow palettes. I've never been impressed and it still says the same. I feel like I'm not impressed by the mattes. I'm not impressed by the shimmers. Did it perform well? Yes. Did I get like a pretty okay look? Yes. It didn't like perform badly, but this is not the eyeshadow palette that I would gravitate towards in 2024. If this was like taken away from my collection, I am not gonna remember this. So that's why this is ranking on number 60. On number 59, we have the Chance palette from Mad Witch Cosmetics. Again, I'm not gonna support this brand going forward in 2025. I've already reached out to the brand. But previously this brand was with Poppy Cosmetics. I think I'm right, and that's why I was like willing to try the brand. But this right now, the current brand owner, the beauty community has a lot to say about it, and I'm not going to support that. So that is why this I'm ranking on number 59. But talking about the color story, I feel like the multichromes are really good, but the mattes are pretty one tone, I would say. So I won't get like variety of eye looks from this palette alone. And again, this palette, I feel the same. If this was taken away from me, I'm not gonna like miss it. My favorite shade out of the palette is the shade called Promise. This is a white shimmer. It looks so wet on the eyes. Very, very pretty shade. On number 58, we have the Christmas Town palette from Melt Cosmetics. This was actually, I had an issue with Melt, one of the Melt palettes growing mold, and I reached out to them and they said you can pick out any palette. So I picked out this palette, but this is another palette that did not wow me at all. The mattes were like pretty dusty on me. I liked these greens, but I do not wear that many greens, and the purples were like very lackluster in my opinion. So that's why it's ranking a little low. Next, we have another palette from Mad Witch Cosmetics. It is the Sun palette. I recently reviewed this. I'm not all about the color story here, but this performed way, way better than the Chance palette. But talking about the color story, these are not the colors that I gravitate towards, and that is why I'm ranking this here. Next, we have Gourmande Girls Calavera palette. I totally feel like this palette was a dud that I got from that batch. Because I feel like only me and Brittany got this like a palette that had more dustier formula. I've seen a lot of people rave about this palette and this color story. Color story looks really good. It is like it's not a rainbow palette, but it is. It's a very unique tones of mattes that are there. My palette was not that bad, I would say, but I literally have seen like Britney's palette. It was so dusty. My palette, I like Gourmande Girls palettes, and you would see it high up in the ranking. But I feel like even if we talk about the color story, even if all the shades were performing well, I don't think this color story resonates with me. That's why I'm ranking this a little low. Okay, next we have the Star palette. Out of the Mad Witch Cosmetics palettes, I think this is my favorite out of the bunch. That's because of the purples. I feel like the purples here are absolutely amazing. I loved these shades so very much. This is probably my favorite palette along with this. Such an amazing color story for purples. Again, I don't wear blues and greens, so half of the palette is like pretty much, I don't touch it that much, but the purples are absolutely amazing. Next, we have Ladybug Glow's Kriyatura palette. This palette Formula wise, absolutely amazing. I feel like from now onwards, the formula is absolutely amazing. It's all about the color story, okay? And this is not the color story that I gravitate towards. It has a lot of punchier shades. These are like pretty much like neon shades, which I hardly use, but their shimmer formulas, I've always loved them and I will always love their shimmer formulas. Such a beautiful like quality palette. I really like it. I love these tones, like muted grungy tones, plus the holochromes and the multichromes that were included in it was really good. Next we have Gourmande Girls Gourmande Isis palette. This is totally based on the color story. I really like this palette, but I feel like they are lacking a bit of deeper tones in this palette. Even though we have these two deeper tones, I feel like only green shows up that deep on me. Rest everything is like pretty mid-tone, and I do not wear that green. These look pretty pastel. It's not like pastel, but it is though. I feel like the color story is a little bit jumbled up for me, and that is why I'm ranking this a little low. Then we have Glaminatrix Cosmetics Pretty in Pastels palette. I really like this palette, okay? I love that they included these deeper tones along with these pastel shades. I'm not a person who gravitates towards pastels, and that's why I'm ranking this a little low, but it is above the rest of the rainbow palettes just because of these like deeper tones and the shimmers. So beautiful, so beautiful. But I have so many Glaminatrix palettes that are ranked high up in the ranking, very high up in the ranking. But this palette, not my favorite from the brand, but the quality, A++. Next we have Moonlit Marsh palette from MBA Cosmetics. Now this I have to be very careful because a lot of the pans are falling off the palette, but this was in collaboration with Basket Case Beauty. This palette, talk about the shimmers, so stunning, absolutely stunning shimmers, but I'm not a big fan of their mattes. So it's like a very half and half feeling for me. I absolutely dip into this palette for the shimmers. Like I have very often dipped into this palette, like to use this shade for every day. This beautiful green to purple shade is amazing. These shades are so punchy on the eyes. I'm not a big fan of the color selection of the mattes here, and that's why I'm ranking this a little low. Next is also from MBA Cosmetics. This was in collaboration by Deandra Nicole, and I recently picked out this Sunset Beach palette. This is a very beautiful color story. If you like these warm sunset tones on the eyes, this performed like a dream on my eyes. This doesn't have like those sparkly shades, but it has like smooth shifty shades. They're very pretty on the eyes, but again, it gives me always, it does give me like that punchier, pinky, orangey kind of a look, which I am not a big fan of. That's the main reason why I'm ranking this a low. But if the color story was a little different, I think the quality is absolutely amazing. If you love the quality, if you love the color story, I'm so sure that you're not going to be disappointed by the quality. Next, we have another Florasis palette. This is their first Florasis palette that I ever reached out. This is the Floral Engraving Beauty Goddess palette. Now this palette I am ranking here because I feel like this palette doesn't go that deep, and I always look out for like a deepening shade in my outer corners. That's my preferred way of applying eyeshadows. And even if this palette has this like dark brown shade, it doesn't show that deep on my eyes. The quality is there. I definitely recommend Florasis to the people who love like everyday, elegant, not punchy, not like super pigmented looks. I feel like Florasis is the brand for you. The quality, again, very elegant shimmers. You won't see like chunkier shimmers or anything. Very creamy formula. So that's why I'm ranking it here. Next, we have Natasha Denona Golden palette. I know Natasha Denona palette on the bottom list. I feel like if this palette would have come after some of the other palettes that I'm going to rank a little bit more higher, I would have not bought this palette with my own money, and this was bought by my own money. There are some of the shades that I absolutely love. I love the shade Kava, I love the shade Alchemist, I love Fizzy, I love Nubia, but rest everything, these mattes, every single like matte, it can be like my neutral undertone. It looks so bland on my eyes, and I couldn't rank this any higher in my ranking. That's why I'm ranking it here. But I do have a code with Natasha Denona. Truthfully speaking, if I would have purchased I need a warm palette before this palette, then I would have never purchased this, because I feel like I need a warm definitely tickles my craving as compared to the golden palette. Next, we have another Florasis palette, and this is the Soaring Sunlight palette. Very pretty, again, very beautiful for everyday looks. I feel like, again, I get very neutral kind of look with this palette. Only if I dip into this blue, I would get that punchier look on the eyes, but rest, otherwise, if you take this blue and this green away, it's like a pretty everyday kind of a palette. This is beautiful as a blush, and these shimmers are what like takes this palette to another level. Really like this palette. Next, we have Ensley Cosmetics What the Fox palette. I am not big on greens, and that's why I'm ranking this on low, but the quality, you know, I love the quality of Ensley palettes. That's not a doubt at all. I love the shimmer multi-chrome formula that is included in this palette, but because of the greens in this palette, and I am not a big green person, it's a personal ranking. That's why I'm ranking this a little low. Next, we have Wicked Widow Beauty's Lovesick palette, and this is a 8-pan color story. These colors are very beautiful. I absolutely love this palette. For a mauvey look, I definitely dip into this, but this doesn't give me as much as a variety that I really look forward for. Again, it is an 8-pan eyeshadow palette, so I'm not expecting too much, but I would have loved if there was like one like deep eggplant shade instead of like 2 mauvey shade. That would have definitely taken this palette to another level. Next, we have another Florasis palette, and I think this is the last Florasis palette that I'm going to talk about, and this is my favorite out of the bunch. This is the Burgundy Sunset palette. This is me in a color story, okay? I love a good mauvey burgundy color story, and this is like my everyday palette. Again, I love this palette. I feel like this brown definitely does show up a little bit more darker on me, but saying that, it doesn't go as deep as the other palettes, so I feel like the variety of like light to deep, it's a little limited. You have a lighter tone shade, but they have so many mauvey shades that are very close to each other. It's giving us too many of them. So that's why I'm ranking this here. Next, we have Gourmande Girls Perfect Peach palette. I feel like a lot of people would rank this much higher. Now, again, I am not big on greens, and this palette is like half green, half peach, orangey palette. That's the only reason why I'm ranking this low, but the quality is absolutely there. I absolutely loved the looks that I created using this palette, but this is not the palette that I reach out for. You will see a palette that they created this year, which is high up in the ranking. I'm very excited about that, okay? Next, we have Luna Beauty's Nude Prism palette. I know this is not a recent palette, but I tried this out this year, and I'm ranking this here just because I feel like I love the shimmers on the eyes. The impact of the shimmers when it is applied on the eyes is beautiful, but talking about that, it doesn't give me as much as variety, especially on my medium tan skin tone. I feel like every look that you would get out of this palette is more like a pinky mauvey kind of a color story with neutral browns and with like some kind of a champagne or a pink shimmer shade. I feel like if this palette would have condensed to a 9-pan eyeshadow palette, it would have tickled my cravings just the same way, even if it is like a 18-pan eyeshadow palette. I feel like their recent palette that they came out with, like the day and the night collaboration, you can easily get it from this palette, so I didn't get that one. Okay, so those were like my bottom 20 palette, I would say. Now let's move on to like the mid section where I really like the palette's quality. It's all about the color story and it's all about your preference, but these palettes are really high in the quality factor. And I feel like this middle range has like 21 palettes, so let's begin. So the next palette that I'm going to talk about is Wicked Widow Beauty's The Crow palette. This is a very beautiful palette. If you like deeper tones on your eyes, you would absolutely love it. This gives me a lot of variety. You might not think that way, but I have clearly explained it in my video where I reached out for when I was creating different looks of this palette. I could create a green look, I could create a red look, I could create a blue look, I could create a gray look, a red look. It is so versatile in terms of like the color story, but it does have a lot of deepening shades and less mid-tone and lighter tones in this palette. And it goes with the theme. The crow theme is like dark and deep and like Halloween related. But with the number of times I reached out for this palette, I'm going to rank this here. The next palette that I'm going to talk about is the Ensley Strawberry Moon palette. Now this is very, very colorful for me. Again, I love the formula of Ensley palettes, I really do. But this color story is not for me, and that is why I'm ranking this here, just because it's too loud for me, at least for my liking. Next is a stunning palette from this brand. This is Simply Posh Cosmetics Coastal palette. I really, really love it. Really love it. I feel like I do not dip more into like these greens and blues, but this column, stunning. This grayish kind of a column here, stunning. The shimmers here, absolutely beautiful. Cannot complain one bit. They blend, they build so beautifully. But with the number of usage, I'm going to rank this here. Next, we have Blend Bunny Cosmetics Longing palette. I know a lot of people would like scream at me right now, but these tones on me, I like a good muted tone, but I feel like this is too gray. It has like a lot of gray kind of an effect on my eyes, at least for my skin tone. I feel like just because I'm a neutral skin tone, I feel like it's gonna pull a lot more gray as compared to other people. But saying that, I love the quality of Blend Bunny Cosmetics palette. I absolutely love them. I have another palette from them higher in the ranking, but I still have to play more with it. Right now, I feel like this ranking seems good with me, just because the other palettes that I'm gonna rank higher is much more like user friendly in my opinion. The next palette that we have is from Kryptein Cosmetics, and this is the Atlantis palette. This is a blue palette. I am not a big blue-green person, but talking that, looks that were created using this palette were absolutely outstanding. If you are a blue person, I feel like you will absolutely love this palette. Really love it. Another qualm that I had with this palette is that this palette has a few textural shimmers like Jellyfish and Siren. They are more of a textured formula, and they tend to crease on me when I apply those shimmers. So I have to be very careful on that. I have to thin it out before I apply it on my eyes, and that's why I'm ranking it a little low. Next, we have Ensley Flower Moon palette. I feel like this palette is, again, quality absolutely amazing. I love the purples in this palette, but this palette again has a lot of textural formula which does crease on me if I'm not careful. But also talking, I feel like all of these shimmers are more green leaning, and I'm not a green person. And there are some shades that are very emollient in the pan, which definitely would crease on me, and that's why I'm ranking this a little low. But the color story I really like. Next, we have Natasha Denona's Roxa palette. I am a big purple person, and you will see a lot of purple palettes up high in the ranking. But for Natasha Denona, I feel like it has great quality, but is it giving me that much variety in purple? I don't think so. I definitely appreciate that they included these two shades in the palette so that it can take it to a different direction. But talking that, I still don't feel that this is the purple palette that I gravitate towards in my everyday life. I have so many purple palettes that I gravitate towards, which I happily think of. If I'm thinking of like a purple look, this is not the palette that comes into my mind. Next, we have Gourmande Girls Nueva Vida palette. This was in collaboration with Steph's Beauty Stash, and I truly feel that this color story is very unique to my collection. I love the quality of this palette so very much. I've gotten some amazing looks, but this is a very loud palette for me. It's very neon leaning, and she loves colors. Steph absolutely loves colors, and I feel like this palette was made for her. I really love it. But I feel like there is a place for this palette in my opinion. Again, I do not reach out for these like loud tones in my everyday life. That is why I'm ranking this a little low. Next, we have Ensley actually two palettes back to back. We have Nutty by Nature and Happy Go Lucky. So this would I would like rank a little lower than the other one, just because I feel like their shimmers here are very shimmery, but it's not like shifty or anything, and they have like two very light toned matte. I feel like only one was needed here, because in the mid-tone family I feel like it's only this orange that would like create that warmer tone look. I understand that this can go more warm tone, this can go more like cool tone leaning, but I feel like the color story is a little jumbled up here and doesn't go with my thought process. Next we have the Nutty by Nature by Ensley. I really love this, especially the multichromes that were included in this palette. I feel like it's absolutely amazing, very beautiful in the quality. I absolutely love the quality of this palette, and I do not have any complaints about this palette. Next we have Unearthly Cosmetics Under the Full Moon palette. It is such a beautiful cool tone blue leaning palette. The looks that I've gotten out of this palette, even if it is like a blue look or a green look or a purple look, it has been so amazing. The quality is right up there. I really miss Unearthly Cosmetics. I feel like they gave us so beautiful like formulas in an affordable price point, and I really love them. Next we have Ensley's Cosmic Dreamer palette. I feel like this is a bigger palette. I do not reach out for this palette like so very much, but I feel like there are some very special shimmers and mattes in this palette, which I reach out for like on, if I'm looking for like a orange shimmer, I would go and I'll dip into this. If I'm looking for like a punchy pink, I will go there and dip into this. But this is not a palette as a whole that appeals to me, and that is why I'm ranking this a little low. I do not have any complaints about the quality of the palette. Next we have Polar Express by Nomad Cosmetics. This is such a stunning color story. I feel like if you love blues and if you love neutrals, this is the palette for you. This gives some beautiful wintry looks. I cannot complain one bit about this. They blend so beautifully on the eyes. I love these like white and silver tones that were included in it. This is such an iridescent like shimmery shade. I love it. And these tones of shimmer here, so breathtakingly beautiful. So beautiful. I do not have any complaint about this. This is like a staple winter palette to have in the collection. Next we have Kryptein Cosmetics Tulip Dream palette. The only reason why it's ranking a little low is just because it's a 5-pan palette. I need more. I generally do not reach out for like smaller color story or like 5-pan, 6-pan, 8-pan. That's not me. I love a good variety, and this, because it's just a 5-pan, I do not like reach out for a lot. But saying that, if I would have like depotted this shadow, but also my thoughts are going all over the place. It is a magnetic pan. You can depot it and like arrange it in whatever way you want. If I would put these shadows in like another pan which has a lot more color story, I feel like I'll use it much more. Quality wise, beautiful quality. Next we have Cosmic Beauty's Cool Trills palette. Now this, for a cool tone lover, I feel like this is how you do a palette, okay? I really love the variety and the formula of this palette. It is such a beautiful blue, purple, gray leaning palette. I love that they have not included a lot of grays here. They are definitely going more like mauvey blue color story, and the blues here are more like denim blues, which I absolutely love. I loved the tones and the looks that came out of this palette. I really love it. The next palette is Blend Bunny Cosmetics Sugar and Grunge palette. I did pick it out on a sale when they were like selling this out, but these tones are for me, okay? These are the like muted tones which I absolutely love. So if you ask me Longing palette versus Sugar and Grunge, I am gonna pick this up because I feel like this is such a beautiful color story. This really has my heart. I really love the mattes that were chosen here, but I like the shimmers more in the Longing palette. That's what I have to say. But I have created some beautiful looks out of this palette, so I definitely wanted to rank it a little higher. I feel like we're definitely over a half mark. Next we have Ensley Cosmetics Flourish palette. This is such a beautiful palette for colorful lovers. It has some unique tones of mattes as well as some shifty shimmers. If you are a colorful wearer, I feel like this palette is going to be right up your alley. Next we have Makeup by Mario's Master Mattes palette, and this is the first one. This, I've used it so very much. You can see the dirt and the dust that is coming out of it. I generally do reach out for this palette. There was an era in my this year for where I was just using this palette and I was just dipping into my singles, and that time this came out very, very handy, and I cannot wait to do that again in 2025. But this definitely is like a staple palette, especially if you are like a brown tone wearer person. This is so much like a skin tone colors, so this sculpts your eyes so beautifully. I definitely would recommend this. Next, we have Cosmic Beauty's Neutrals palette. This is the warm tone sister of the Cool Trills palette, but I definitely feel that this is a little bit more interesting on the eyes. It has some beautiful shifty shades, and you can go so many different directions with this. You have some mustards, you have some sagey greens, you have purples, you have that iridescent like white to red shifting shade, this red to green shifting shade. It is such a pretty shade, but also you can go so neutral and glam with these shimmer shades. I absolutely love this, and the quality is right up there. Next, we have Kryptein Cosmetics first palette. This is the Burnt Forest palette. This is how my love affair started for Kryptein Cosmetics. Again, this has a lot of greens in this palette, but I can look past the greens because they look so stunning on the eyes. I feel like these greens help me fall in love with greens. These, as well as there's another palette that I'm going to talk about, but this is such an amazing palette. This palette has some textural shades, especially this moss shade is definitely more on the textured side. You have to thin it out before you apply it on your eyes, especially if you have creasy eyelids like me. But saying that, it is such a stunning shade. I have used this shade, Dawn and Matinal, the most out of this palette. I actually depotted this section of the eyeshadow palette and I placed it in another palette, and I was using it daily. These are some like toppery shades, and that's what I love about Kryptein Cosmetics, when they do that thinly formulated shimmery multichromes. They are so pretty. I definitely would recommend this palette. And then from the midsection, the last palette that I'm going to talk about is the Kryptein Cosmetics Alter palette. Now this is such a beautiful color story, especially for like a stocking stuffer. If you have a person in your life or for yourself, if you are into multichromes but you wear like neutral multichromes, wearable multichromes, this palette is so pretty. I've worn this to office a lot. I really love this palette. I feel like the colors chosen were absolutely beautiful, so I would highly recommend this. I have a code with Kryptein Cosmetics. It's SMITHYSONY to save you 10% off. So those were like my midsection. Now we're going to dip into my most favorite section. This section also has 20 palettes where I am absolutely in love with each and every palette that is in this collection altogether. So let's begin without any fail. The first palette that I'm going to talk about is the Icy Nudes palette. This palette is so pretty on the eyes. I really love it, but I am ranking it low in my most loved palettes is only because of the color story. I feel like there are mattes that would not complement on a lot of skin tones, but on my neutral skin tones, I feel like they perform really well. I really love it. Do I wish that there were less lighter tone mattes? 100% yes. I would have loved if there was only one or two lighter tone mattes and rest everything was like either mid-tone or deeper tones. That would have made this palette a little bit more high up on the ranking, but the quality is there, and that's why I'm ranking this a little higher. Next, we're going to talk about Wicked Widow Beauty's Tales of Terror palette. This is such a beautiful color story. I feel like this is my favorite Wicked Widow Beauty palette that they have come out with. I have to play with this even more, but I feel like this would come in so handy in that fall season, Halloween season. I got this right in the middle of the winter, but I feel like this palette and the color story is so very beautiful. I would highly recommend this. If you love a good Halloween color story or like a fall tone palette, this palette formula is A++. It's a chef's kiss. I absolutely love it. I do have a code with Wicked Widow Beauty. It's SMITHYSONY to save you 10% off. Now let's talk about Unearthly Cosmetics Sorcerer's Smoke. This palette came like on the 1st or the 2nd of this year, and I wore it so very much. I feel like they absolutely killed it for the neutral wearers. This palette is such an amazing palette. I've traveled with this palette. I have often worn it to office. This is like my office buddy for such a, this was my office buddy for such a long time. I really love this palette, and the quality is absolutely amazing. I know Unearthly Cosmetics can be a little pricey, but they give us the quality and they often do sales. So wait for a sale and then grab one. You'll not be disappointed one bit. Next, we have Bella Beauty Bar's Dead Roses palette. This palette had a chokehold on me. I love purples, and this palette had mauvey purples so very much. Especially these two rows in the bottom had my heart. I do not wear like hot pinks so much and the reds, but this section and then this section was screaming my name. Like, look at the shiftiness of the shimmers. They're so very pretty. This would have definitely ranked high up on the ranking if this did not have that hot pinks or the reds, but I totally understand this was like an anti-Valentine's Day palette, but I absolutely love it. I cannot wait to see what they have coming in the future. I definitely want to grab their Poison Garden palette. That's like calling out to me. I was just restricting myself just because it had like a lot of deeper shimmers, and I do not wear deeper shimmers so much on my eyes. That's the only reason, but that color story is calling out to me because it's so unique. Let's move on to the next palette. The next palette is Ensley Rain's Underland palette. This palette definitely has like very deep tones, but very unique tones in my opinion. They're very amazing. I did not think that I would love this palette so very much when this was revealed, but this definitely gave us so much of variety on the eyes. Again, Ensley Rain is another brand that is a little bit more on the pricier side, but I feel like their quality is really there, and the tones that they select in the palettes are absolutely there. So that's why I'm ranking this a little higher. Next, we have Natasha Denona's I Need a Warm eyeshadow palette. This is way up in the ranking. I know it's a boring palette, but you cannot deny I have worn this boring palette so very much. So I definitely had to rank this much higher because I've gotten like some amazing looks out of this palette. So that is why I wanted to rank this much higher, and I love the inclusion of some of the multi-chromes that they included in this palette, and there's some beautiful shimmers and brown tones that complement my neutral undertone very well. So I definitely would rank this higher. On number 14, we have the newest and the first cinch palette. This is the Galactic Visitor palette. This is such a beautiful color story, you guys. I think I would rank it a little bit more higher if I use it even more. I've not used it that much. I think I've only played with this like 5 times, but I have used every single shade and it is performed beautifully, absolutely beautifully. I have done 3 looks with this palette video. This palette is such a gem, especially for like travel. I feel like you get the variety that you're looking for. It goes from very light to very deep shade, and the shimmers that were included in this palette were amazing. I cannot wait to see what she has coming in the future for us because this palette is amazing. This is how you do a palette which is concise, giving us more variety, keeping the price point lower. This has hit all the points. Next, we have my favorite Gourmande Girls palette. This is the Frozen Kiss palette. This palette definitely is a keeper if you love a cool tone and an icy tone in your life. This palette is beautiful. Now, this section altogether gives me so much of feelings because they have some beautiful formulas and the color story is absolutely beautiful. I feel like the looks that I created were amazing, but I've created many looks after that too, and none of the looks gave me any trouble. I absolutely would recommend this palette. I do have a code with Gourmande Girls. It's Smithy Sony to save you 10% off. Actually, I'll link all the codes in my description box below for you guys so that I'm not telling my codes all the time. But this palette, a keeper for sure. Next, this is the only palette that I own from that brand, and I have been impressed by the quality. It's just the matter of the color story what calls out to me, and I'm talking about Fantasy Cosmetica Cradled in Ice palette. Oh, this is so pretty, so pretty. I love a good mauve tone and a purpley tone, and this palette gives it to me. I really wish that there were like a little bit more difference in the shimmers here. It is different, but it could have been a little bit more different. I love the quality of this palette so very much. Another palette that I have it on my wish list is Harvester Souls. It I was waiting for the Black Friday sale and it sold out. And I was devastated, to say the least. Next palette that I'm going to talk about is the Sigma Cool Neutrals palette. This is such an amazing palette, especially if you are like medium tan skin tone and if you wear neutral color story on your eyes. I feel like this palette is going to call out to you. This has some warm tones, some neutral tones, and some cool tones all in one palette. I feel like they definitely stepped up their shimmer game also with this palette, and I would highly recommend this. This has been amazing. And they always come out with like a brush to a double-ended brush, which is very convenient. Okay, now we're going to talk about my top 10. The top 10 has been very good this year. This year, I feel like there were indie brands who absolutely killed it. Like, I feel like that all the top 10 palettes are indie brands and they have absolutely killed it in the makeup, like color story wise, the quality wise, the way they perform on the eyes. They were absolutely amazing. So on number 10, I'm going to talk about my Flutter palette. This has been such an amazing palette. The shimmers are absolutely beautiful and the mattes are also absolutely stunning. I don't know what's going to happen in 2025 because I just recently heard about the news. So I am still not sure about how we're going to proceed in 2025, if they're going to say something about the topic or not. So I'm not going to support Ensley in future till the time they don't come out with like with a reasoning that is solid for their customers and consumers. And me being a creator, I do not want to support hate one bit. That's not my channel at all. But I have to rank these palettes the way they are and the way I felt about the palettes itself. I'm not talking about like the brand names or what they support or what they not support. I have a lot of thoughts about it, but it's very clear on my Instagram that I would not support hate. Okay, talking about, let's move on. This is on number 9. This is Unearthly Cosmetics Gargoyle palette. This has such an amazing color story. If you are a cool tone wearer, I feel like this palette is going to be such an amazing keeper for you. This is beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I don't think you will be disappointed one bit with this palette. This is such an amazing color story with like blues, purples, greens, neutral tones, everything in one palette. And these palettes are magnetic. They come with a mirror too. I have loved Unearthly Cosmetics formula. I really do. I'm not an affiliate with the brand, but I know there are a lot of creators who are an affiliate. This brand is definitely a keeper. I love the color stories that they create. Okay, let's talk about number 8. We have Nomad Cosmetics Chicago Speak Easy palette. This had my name written all over it. I knew immediately when I played with this palette that this is going to be on my top 10 list because this color story speaks my name. I love a good neutral tones with that purpley mauvey tones and a column, not too much, but it gives so much interest onto the palette. I really love this. The quality is there. It's blendable, it's sparkly, it's shifty, it's all the things that you're looking for. I would highly recommend Chicago Speakeasy. I do have a code with them too. Okay, next we have on number 7. I feel like this is my favorite Kryptein Cosmetics palette, and this is the Violet Crazy palette. This is the purple palette that I love and adore from an indie brand. This gives us variety in purples. It gives us all the shimmers. They do not have any like textural shimmers in this palette, which I absolutely love. They have some beautiful smooth shimmers, and that's the reason why this is on top 10, because I absolutely love everything that they included in this palette. This is such a stunning palette. Definitely a keeper if you are a purple wearer. This palette is stunning, absolutely beautiful. Next we have Ensley Light in Your Eyes palette. This palette has some beautiful like neutral shimmers with a twist. They have some beautiful tones. This is again a grungy color story but muted down, and the shimmers are absolutely wonderful. I had to recommend this, so that's why this is ranking here. Next, we have Glaminatrix Cosmetics Barely Basic palette. This palette is such a keeper. If you are a neutral lover, this palette, you need it in your life. This has some beautiful gradient of mattes that can give you some beautiful monochromatic looks, but it also has some shimmery shades here and some shifty multichromes here. It is an absolute keeper. Any look that has been created using this palette has been such an amazing color story. Wow, Smithy, I had lipstick all over my mouth. So rude that you didn't tell me, right? But this palette definitely a keeper. So that is on number 5. On number 4, we have the newest Cosmic Beauty palette. This is Tis the Season palette. The minute I played with it, I knew that this is going to be such a favorite in my collection. This is such a beautiful, colorful palette. Oh, I could create and think of 10,000 looks that can come out of this palette. This is such beautiful palette, and the quality is right there. I am so excited to see what Cosmic Beauty does in the future, because this is stunning, absolutely stunning. I cannot recommend this enough. If you are a colorful wearer, I feel like you would absolutely love it. And this is a brand that gives us variety in terms of color story, but also at an affordable price. What is not to love about it? I really love it. On number 3, we have Ensley Groovy Garden palette. Now this palette came up high in the ranking because I have loved the mattes in this palette. I feel like, I'll be very honest, I feel like these 3 palettes that I'm going to talk about, I feel like they excel in mattes for sure, but also in shimmers. But this palette I have loved, and I feel like this is the most used mattes in my whole collection. There were imprints all across the mattes, and there are some imprints that have completely gone to. Like this is also the green that I would love to wear. But talking about that, let's talk about the shimmers. I feel like I love this shimmer. I love Lava Lamp. I love these 2 shimmers. But I feel like there are a lot of shimmers that are more green leaning, and me not being a green person, I feel like it's too much of green for me. That's why this is ranking on number 3. But this has been absolutely amazing color story and the quality of the palette. If you have it, you know what I'm talking about. On number 2, I feel like this is a neutral palette that I have worn for days non-stop. I've traveled with this many times. I have absolutely loved the quality of this palette too. I'm talking about Adept Cosmetics Flying Fiddles palette. I had to rank it on number 2 because the number of times I've worn this palette and the number of times I've been like happy with this palette is so much. So I definitely had to recommend this on number 2. This is like me in a color story, except the greens. But I've already spoken about this palette a lot of times. Whenever I'm traveling with this palette, I just pick these 2 shades out and put like my purples in this palette with the other purple palettes that I have. Mostly it is either going to be from Minka palette or from Element 115 palette from Adept, but it creates such amazing color stories. So like with a little few tweaks, this clearly can be like my favorite palette. I love the packaging too. So concise, magnetic palette, everything. On number 1, this palette had me feelings like no other. I could not stop raving about this palette. I could not stop using this palette. This is the palette that I have on my eyes. If you can guess, leave it down in the comment section below. On number 1, we have Unearthly Cosmetics Just a Taste palette. This palette, oh my gosh, it is so pretty. It has warm tones, it has cool tones. The color story is so pretty. I definitely went with warm tones today, but the cool tones of this palette are breathtakingly beautiful. You can create some gorgeous look even if you just use 2 shadows. And this palette is curated in such a genius way that you can create looks with like 6 pans here. If you look like that, you can create looks with like this row. If you look like that, you can create some looks if you just look at the quads here. It is such a genius color story. I have absolutely loved the color stories that Amanda has created with Unearthly Cosmetics. I cannot recommend them enough, and their packaging, everything just speaks out to my soul. So that's why this is ranking on number 1. Do let me know in the comment section below. Do you agree with my ranking or not? And I absolutely loved playing with this all 61 palettes in my collection, okay? I'm a big eyeshadow palette fanatic. I really appreciate each and every one of you that is here. And I love you very much. That's all for today. If you did like my video, you know what to do. Do give it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring the notification bell so that you're notified every time that I post next. I generally upload 3 videos every single week, every Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until next time, I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.